The hull tore open like paper before a fist, and Marlowe pressed his spine flat against the observation deck's cold wall while a 2.5-meter raider stepped through the smoke. He had told this story 100 times since, to investigators who never believed him, and he still started it here, because this was the moment he understood that everything he knew about strength was wrong. 3 days later, in every retelling, he'd go back further to explain how they got here. But in the moment itself, there was no time for explaining anything. It began, if it began anywhere, with a freighter that had no business still flying. Platform 63 took every distress call in range, station law, no exceptions. So when the wreck signaled for emergency docking, Marlowe's shift stopped being routine. The ship came in trailing atmosphere from 3 separate wounds, one engine sheared clean away, and somehow it landed instead of dying. 5 humans walked off it looking like they'd forgotten what sleep was. The captain had a scar cutting down one cheek and an argument already loaded in her mouth. Something about fees she wasn't going to pay for damage that, according to her, wasn't damage at all. "Those are speed holes," she told the docking officer. "They're a feature." Marlowe's partner, a scaled veteran named Quent, rattled with the low sound he made instead of sighing. 15 cycles on this station had taught him one lesson about this species. They patched hull breaches with stubbornness and dared physics to argue. Her name was Maya Reeves. Her manifest didn't match her cargo hold, 30% lighter than declared, she said, because pirates had made her throw half of it out an airlock to survive. Marlowe was still running the math on that story when the alarms started screaming. Ships were coming out of faster than light off the platform's flank, and they wore the markings of the Rakthan cartel, the kind of raiders who didn't leave witnesses behind to describe them. Reeves went cold and still in a way her wrecked ship hadn't prepared him for. "They followed us here," she said, and something in her voice made Marlowe forget, for a second, that she was supposed to be exhausted cargo crew and nothing more. She split her people fast, 2 to help seal the bay, 2 with her. When she headed for the station's highest, most exposed vantage point instead of the shelters, Marlowe went after her, not because it made sense, but because his instincts told him to watch. "You're not defending anything from up here," he said. "You're a cargo hauler." "I'm a cargo hauler who really hates being chased." She didn't slow down. That was when the pieces started sliding into place. The way her crew moved without arguing, the way a man named Marcus predicted exactly where the raiders would breach the hull because, he said, it was where he'd have chosen. "We're not cargo," Reeves finally admitted, watching the boarding craft lock onto the station's skin. "We just occasionally are. Mostly we're people who used to wear uniforms and don't anymore." "Mercenaries," Marlowe said. "Aggressively entrepreneurial," she corrected, and then the wall came apart. The raiders didn't cut through, they blew the plating inward, and their leader stepped through the smoke first, spike-armored, a rifle heavy enough to gut a shuttle. He looked at 3 humans standing in open ground and laughed low through his helmet speaker. "The patrol sends children to guard this station." "We're not patrol," Reeves said. "Then you're already dead. Step aside and I might let you live." "No," she said, "just that." He raised the rifle. Marlowe watched what happened next and spent years afterward failing to describe it properly. Reeves crossed the space between them before the shot could clear the barrel, inside his reach before his brain caught up to the fact that she'd moved. He shoved her off with the flat, brute strength of his armor, sent her skidding across the deck. And she came up out of the roll already turning, already planted, and when he lunged for her a second time, she took his wrist, turned her hips into the motion, and threw him. Not staggered him, threw him, a fully armored raider sailing through the air to crash into 2 of his own men coming through the breach behind him, all 3 going down in a heap of dented plating. The room went silent except for the hiss of atmosphere sealing itself. Reeves dusted off her palms like she'd knocked crumbs from a table. Anyone else want to do this the hard way? Then the room exploded into motion, plasma fire lighting the deck, Hank lifting a raider clean off his feet and hurling him into the emergency shield, Marcus moving through 3 attackers like they were standing still, striking joints, throat seals, weak points he seemed to already know by heart. Reeves put the leader down for good against a support pillar that buckled under the impact. "That's two," she called out, breathing hard. "He hit himself," Hank said, currently choking a raider with the man's own gear strap. "Still counts." Marlowe remembered, belatedly, that he had a job. He ran the lockdown from Central Operations while the station shook around him, sections sealed. Defense turrets brought back online by a woman named Lucia who put a plasma round through a fleeing cruiser's thrusters at a lead angle Marlowe would never have called possible. The raider's own boarding craft went up in a string of charges Marcus had wired without anyone noticing when. Their reinforcements never made it through. When it was over, 4 raiders hung fused into hardened emergency foam at the breach point they'd blown open so confidently, and Quent's voice came over the comm sounding like a man questioning his own eyes. The humans secured the deck, all of them, alone. The commander who arrived to survey the wreckage asked, simply, for an explanation. Reeves gave her one word: physics. The commander studied her a long moment with all 4 eyes before laughing, deep and rolling, and waiving every docking fee on the spot. She even offered Reeves a standing post. Reeves turned it down before the sentence finished. "Staying put," she said, made her itchy. They stayed 2 days to patch the freighter. Marlowe watched new plating go up over old wounds, engines coaxed back into a working hum, until the ship looked less like wreckage and more like something that intended to keep flying. It was on the final night, sitting on an overturned crate near the hull while sparks from a welding torch lit her face gold, that Reeves gave him the answer he'd actually been chasing since the throw. "You want to know how," she said without him asking. "Everyone wants to know how. Wrong question." "Then what's the right one?" She turned the flask in her hands instead of drinking from it. "Why we didn't leave, that's the one that matters." She was quiet a moment, and for the first time since he'd met her, she didn't sound like she was performing anything. "We're not the strongest out here, not the fastest. Don't repeat that near a centurion, they'll never let it go. But put us somewhere we're not supposed to win, and something in us just refuses to hear it. We get angry instead of scared. We get stubborn instead of sensible. And a person that's stubborn doesn't check the odds before deciding whether to help you." "That's not a strategy," Marlowe said. "No, it's just what we are. You don't leave people to get taken apart because helping got inconvenient. Wasn't ever on the table tonight, and it never will be." She looked at him fully then, and whatever had been guarded in her face for 2 days came open for just that sentence. "That's the part nobody explains right. We don't fight because we're strong. We fight because giving up never once felt like an option worth having." He shook her hand at the ramp the next morning, and she told him to look her crew up if the quiet ever got to be too much. Then the ramp sealed, and the freighter pulled away from the platform, scarred but holding, engines catching clean. Marlowe stayed at the viewport long after the shimmer of their jump had faded. Quent came to stand beside him, silent a while before he spoke. "You really believe what you told the commander? Just physics?" Marlowe looked at the welding torch, still cooling on the crate she'd left behind. A thin curl of smoke rising off it into the recycled air. "Aggressive physics," he said. "Very aggressive."